Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I'm your host, Scott Brady, and I'm with my co-host, Matt Swartz.
Hi there.
And we're going to talk about, it's an electrifying subject. We're going to, terrible pun. I'm like dad jokes.
Got to get them in there every chance you can, though.
So we're going to talk about the Hummer EV, which I will say off the bat is an extremely exciting vehicle on specification and in practice. And we're going to talk about our experience with that vehicle over the last 2 days in Arizona. And we're going to go through the specs. We're going to go through all of our impressions and our opinions on the vehicle and what it does great at and what it doesn't do so great at. Really fun vehicle overall. And special thanks to Equipped for supporting today's podcast. More than 15 years ago, Equipped Expedition Outfitters became the first American company to import the best-in-breed vehicle expedition equipment from across the globe. Since their humble beginnings, they have risen to become a go-to leader within the adventure travel industry, continuing to deliver a diverse portfolio of reliable, long-lasting products backed by unparalleled customer service. From shelter solutions from Easy On to portable fridges from National Luna to aluminum storage boxes from Alubox, their ever-growing selection of best-in-class gear increases your capability, comfort, and confidence during any adventure. Visit equippedone.com to gear up. Before we do that, what's new, Matt? What's going on?
Oh, man. Lots of stuff, honestly. So just had the truck in at Summit 4x4, which is our local specialty off-road vehicle shop up here in Prescott.
Yep.
And those guys were installing a new AEV lift in our 2500 Ram. And so
looks so good.
It looks really good. It looks really good. Yeah, it changed the character of that truck so much. And in addition to the lift, we put on some 17-inch wheels, also from AEV with 37-inch tires. And so, yeah, going from the OEM, like standard on the road,
sure,
wheel tire combo to what is really like a proper wheel for overland driving off-road adventures. It's totally different.
Yeah, it just matches the flotation to the weight of the truck.
Yeah.
So it's just going to really improve you'll find in the snow it's going to do better. You'll find in the sand it's going to do better. Mud, it'll do better, a little more flotation. But it looks great, and I've always been such a huge fan of the Tradesman, so to see the Tradesman project coming along like that is great.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to producing some video content around this upgrade specifically because I was lucky enough to have AEV support with the new dual sport suspension package that they're doing, and so that has the new Bilstein 8100 shock in it, which is a remote reservoir shock, and it's just like, it's so beefy. And AEV tunes everything so that you get like a very close to you maintain OEM performance, right? You maintain your OEM springs, so you have those same spring rates and everything. So performance is not diminished in any way as far as towing or payload, but you have just such a much more comfortable ride. And even in the minimal amount of driving I've done since getting the truck back, it's already noticeable. I mean, it just feels so much more plush, and
the tires help as well.
Definitely.
You have more carcass that can, absorb energy from the road and impacts and like attenuate a little bit. And you did a General tire, it looked like.
Yep. We put General ATX AT tires on there. So they're aggressive. They've got, some serious tread coming down onto the sidewall. Mm-hmm. So you get that protection and that extra traction when you air down the tires. But I think they're a great tire for someone like us who does a lot of towing too. They're not overly aggressive like a mud terrain. They're not going to hopefully affect our gas mileage quite as much. But they have a really good warranty on them. I think they're 50,000 miles. And yeah, you can, I think we're supposed to run them at about 50 PSI, which is a little bit less at the high end than what we're used to. The truck calls for 60 PSI in the OEM tires. So
nice.
Even that, softens the ride.
It will. It'll make a difference. It'll make a difference also on the trail and everything else.
Yep.
So now that you can go so much lower on air pressure, it's going to, well, and you already took the truck out for a little bit of an evaluation. So it'll be fun to get your thoughts and future videos. You just dropped your first segment video on that truck, so everybody can check that out on YouTube.
Yep.
And you're getting ready to leave Arizona. Where are you heading?
Yeah, so my partner Amanda and our dog Royal and I are all going to load up the Airstream, and we're going to head up to Grand Junction to start off. So going to be hopefully doing some paragliding there. There's a great spot for ridge soaring. And I also have two of the most important people to me. There are others, but
yeah, sure.
two of them. One of my brothers, my youngest brother Tom, and one of my best friends in the world, Ethan. They're both going to come out from the East Coast, and they're going to join us. We're going to do a 4-day backpacking route back behind the Colorado National Monument.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's going to be nice. Lots of solitude. There's a wilderness area back there that few people visit, and so in the few times I've been there, I've seen like one or two other people. And
that'll be magic. That's amazing.
Yeah. What about you? What's going on with you?
We're getting ready for the Overland Expo West, so we're starting to get ramped up for that. I'm getting a new Scout with some updates that they've done. We didn't have any issues with the Scout we have now, but they wanted to make sure that we were able to evaluate some of these new updates that they've been doing, which is great. They've got some new door configurations. They simplified things a little bit, removed some weight. So it's even more durable and minimalist than it was before, which is, for me, is awesome. So
yeah, I know
excited to get that new one.
You like a camper that's very simple.
Yeah.
Analog.
As analog as possible, because what you really want, I find, or what I should rephrase that, what I really want in a camper is a quiet, comfortable, and then warm, if necessary, place to sleep. And the Scout just like totally rocks that for a reasonable amount of money. So,
and without the complication of a lot of the systems that are kind of standard in other campers.
Yeah, and everybody's going to have different needs, and for me, I'm happy with just having like a Goal Zero in there and very minimal electronics and very minimal systems. I don't need it to make hot water for me or have a water pump or anything like that. I want a really comfortable, quiet place to do work, and then a comfortable, quiet place to sleep at night, despite the conditions. So for me, the simplicity was king. Yeah, so a lot going on with us with the Overland Expo coming up. That's an exciting time of year.
Oh, yeah.
And we've got a couple more vehicle launches coming up that are also really exciting. Some other new full-size truck products that are coming out with a lot more capability that we're going to be able to evaluate. So the full-size truck segment continues to blossom. Like we had the Power Wagon, that was it. But now we've got super trucks and other vehicles with front and rear lockers and everything else. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's hard to deny that Payload.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really makes a difference. I mean, we were talking about that in the truck this morning driving up, of just AT4 it's just like a great car to drive. It's great on the highway. I can take it to Home Depot and get whatever I want to grab and throw a camper in the back of it, or go do most trails. I mean, they are definitely size limited. There's no question. It's not as capable as like my G-Wagon was, for example, but a lot more trails than you'd think.
Well, and you have that awesome low displacement diesel engine that it just like gets incredible gas mileage considering the size of that vehicle.
Yeah, that's the winner for me. I mean, if I was to say anything about the truck that I love the most, it's that drivetrain. It's the 3-liter turbo diesel with a 10-speed automatic. To get, like, even in a 400-mile evaluation range on fuel economy, I've gotten as high as 24.8 miles per gallon.
Wow.
And it's got larger tires on it.
Right.
It's upgraded to a BF Goodrich, almost a 35. It's got a little bit heavier wheels on it as well. Other than that, it's pretty stock, but it's incredible the gas mileage it gets.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we were seeing 20 today on I-17 with a Putco rack and an iCamper roof tent on the top of it.
Yeah, that doesn't exactly, I mean, that it sticks out a little bit.
It does. Yep. Yeah, it does.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. Yeah, they just keep getting better and better. We'll talk about getting it better and better. I mean, we just tested a super truck for a couple days in Arizona, which is a great experience. We're going to riff through a couple of the considerations around the vehicle, but Matt and I thought it would be fun to talk through some of the key specs. I actually ran out of room on my piece of paper, and I needed to move some of the segments down because there's so many crazy things about this vehicle. And we can start with something that has nothing to do with overlanding, but it has to do with, like, life is short and you might as well have some fun.
Joy.
Yeah, there's just joy. Yeah, yes. Exactly.
Yep.
This is right within the joy category, which is 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. which we experienced the other day.
We have the GoPro footage to prove it.
We do, and we'll probably be able to put that here in the podcast, like our expressions.
I already watched mine. I have a stupid look on my face, and then obviously
I haven't seen mine yet.
A big grin afterwards.
Oh, I haven't watched mine yet. That's so, yeah. I should pull it up right now. Get like the real time.
The reaction of your reaction.
Yeah. Oh wow. Yeah. It was. Yeah. You feel your vision actually narrowing because the acceleration is so prodigious. It's 100%. Incredible.
Yeah, just getting pressed back into that seat like you're in a rocket ship.
It felt like a rocket ship, and it just doesn't make any of the traditional internal combustion engine noises. So it's just like this violent acceleration, that was super fun.
Oh yeah.
So we'll go into that a little bit more, and it achieves that with 1,000 horsepower and 1,200 foot-pounds of torque at the motor. GMC, Hummer, they talk about 11,500 foot-pounds of torque. And we actually found out, like, what does that actually mean?
It takes some math to get there. It's kind of unique to an electric vehicle. Well, not just an electric vehicle, but a lot of vehicles, if you did the math out,
exactly
the way they're doing, could advertise a higher torque output, right?
Correct. So it seems like this insane number, but it's actually requires some context. So the 11,500 foot-pounds of torque is the torque that's at the wheels, and which means that it's going through this. They have a motor drive unit, and that motor drive unit has gearing, and that gearing affects the leverage of the torque that's available from the motor. Now, the thing that we don't know for sure is how the tire diameter, how that factors in. Like, is that when they say at the wheel, is that at the hub of the wheel, or is that at the outer diameter of the wheel? It doesn't specify that, so that might be interesting for us to find out at some point. As an example, we were watching a YouTube video trying to learn the difference between the two.
Yep.
And the guy who was speaking was talking about the example of a Dodge Damon. So that is a vehicle that has just under 1,000 foot-pounds of torque at the motor. And because it goes through a transmission with a first gear of 4.72 and then goes through a final drive in the rear axle, I believe it was 3.09 was the number
Sounds right.
that he used, it actually ends up generating 14,000 plus foot-pounds of torque at the wheel. So when you compare them, like a Dodge Damon, it is a crazy fast car. In fact, I think it's one of the fastest 0 to 60 quarter-mile production vehicles that you can buy. So that's amazing. So when we put that in the context of the Supertruck, that just shows how fast it is. So those numbers are similar. In fact, the Damon makes more foot-pounds of torque at the wheel than the Supertruck does. This 10,000-pound Hummer goes 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. It's unreal.
That's the part that really catches you off guard.
Yeah.
It's a 10,000-pound vehicle. It is not small at all.
No, it's huge. Like just the dimensions of it, not just the weight.
Yeah. But it drives like a smaller vehicle.
Yeah, which we found out during the testing, and we'll talk about that in a second. It has 3 motors on board. It has 2 motors in the rear. So it has this very interesting, like, combined motor drive unit. The castings that keep these things attached to the chassis are massive. It's independent front and rear with front and rear steering, and the half shafts are massive. I mean, they look like something that you would see in a F450 or something like that. They're absolutely massive.
I remember you pointing that out. I mean, when we were looking at when they had the Bear, the Ultium platform chassis for us to have a look at, and I found that really interesting. And I also was really interested, I mean, you just mentioned it has the 3 motors. In electric vehicles, I think we've gotten used to seeing the motor unit in the hub, right at the wheel. But
like in the Rivian?
Yeah, but the Hummer EV is different.
It is.
The motors are on the inside on the chassis, and that provides actually some advantages in some ways.
It does. It allows for the opportunity for a larger motor with more power. It also allows you to do some really effective cooling around it.
That was the one I remembered. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know that the Rivian, for example, under certain conditions, the motors can get really hot, low speed, high torque, low airflow. The ones in the wheel, they can only dissipate heat so much. whereas they have
during movement, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, like low speed movement.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the Hummer has these oil cooled. The way that the engineer described it to us is that you have this oil reservoir and it pumps oil through the electric motors, and then that oil goes through a heat exchanger, which is actually a glycol loop.
That's right.
And as I remember, they use some of that also to generate heat within the cabin. They do a lot of very cool things that help them do that. And then each individual battery battery pack, which has they have 24 battery packs, 24 cells per pack.
Yep.
Each one of those is cooled with a cooling plate.
Yep.
So very clever how they manage heat with all of that current. I think when we were getting to the trailhead, it was this monster Arizona storm, and I was saying, like, how does it feel to be like in this torrential rainstorm sitting on 1.3 gigawatts of I mean, there's so much power. Like, you feel like you can like power an entire block with that thing.
Totally. You need the flux capacitor like right behind your shoulder.
Oh yeah, and one of the engineers said, like, if you look in the icons of all the icons you can pick for the accessories, I think there might be a flux capacitor in there. So it's just fun.
Perfect.
The little Easter eggs I think are really awesome.
Totally.
Yeah. 3 motors, 2 in the rear, 1 in the front, and then it does have a differential in the front with an electric locker. So the front is a e-locker, electrically activated, mechanical, driver-actuated locker. In the rear is, I would call it like a V-locker, a virtual locker. So it has 2 motor drives, so they match the motor speeds very tightly. There are some factors that can influence that, but they match the motor speeds very tight in RPM, so you end up with essentially the effect of a locker with no wheel spin from one side to the other. But it's very clever how it does it, because even like in a really tight turn, if it's noticing a lot of scrub, then the vehicle can actually loosen up that locker a little bit. So I didn't get quite the same scrubbing that you would feel with a mechanical locker.
So it's not kind of fighting you on those tight turns and things like that.
Correct. And it also allows them to put in some safety guards as well, where if one particular wheel is at some extreme amount of torque or extreme amount of pressure, they could probably back that off a little bit to help preserve some of the mechanical components. So even though it says it's locked, and in every effect it was, like yesterday, it worked exactly how you would want a locker to work. So I don't want to take anything away from this. Mm-hmm. I actually think like it's an electronic locker, but better. So it does all of the things you want in an electronic
like a smart locker.
It is, for sure, which is awesome. So very interesting how they set that up. It's got UltraVision, which is their 18 camera view camera system.
The number of camera views is insane.
Yeah.
And it's awesome.
It is really impressive.
I mean, especially for a vehicle of that size, you know, I mean, like there's no ego in this. Like if you're piloting a vehicle of that size, it's so helpful to have some cameras to look at. It really just, it gives you a lot more confidence as a driver.
What was your favorite view overall?
I mean, I think the one that felt most practical to me was just the front view, you know, below like kind of grill height looking forward. Because there were a lot of instances on the test drive where, you know, we were cresting steep little sections where all I could see was sky.
Right.
And then I could
It's a big hood.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, being able to easily glance down at the infotainment screen, which was giant. It was like 12 inches, I think.
At least, yeah, it was huge.
And being able to just drive off of that for, you know, 2 seconds until I had a view of the trail out the windshield again. It was fantastic.
Yeah, I like that combination of that view with the overhead view, where it's this like compilation of all of the camera views that they stitch into this, like basically like a drone view perspective of where the vehicle's at on the trail. I found that really helpful as well. I like the fact that it had those under chassis cameras.
Yeah.
So they use a hydrophobic coating that helps to keep water from collecting on the lenses. And then they even have little sprayers to clean them off, because of course under the chassis gets a bunch of dirt and grime. But the thing you notice right away is the underbody is completely flat.
Yeah, it almost looks like a toy car on the bottom. There's like, but there's nothing to get hung up.
That's right.
It's just like one giant smooth skid plate that can just glide off of anything.
And they had so many specifications around preventing these batteries from getting punctured on rocks and everything else like that, because they wanted to build the ultimate electric off-road vehicle. So they had all these intense requirements around performance, but that means you're rock crawling and everything else, so you can come down on skid plates. And it's just this full-length boron steel skid plate, so super strong, super light, high degree of puncture resistance, and totally flat. There's just a couple little holes for probably air cooling and stuff like that, but yeah, pretty interesting. Because we're used to seeing exhaust hanging down and differentials hanging down and shock mounts hanging down, and all of that is tucked up with the independent suspension and that skid plate.
Yeah, that's a whole different mentality that you can take onto the trail when you're not so worried about ripping something off or damaging something that's going to disable your vehicle.
Yeah, and then what did you think about the range at 350 miles?
We drove all day.
Yeah,
literally all day, and had power to spare when we got back to our final destination.
We did. I think we came in at just about 50% based upon the bar graph.
Yeah,
we left in the morning. We drove an hour to the trailhead.
An hour of highway driving.
Which we drove entirely at the speed limit.
Of course, would never exceed the speed limit.
Under any conditions.
Never. And then hours of off-road driving.
Yeah, and then we did it twice. So we had a pre-lunch off-road route and then a post-lunch off-road route. And they were several, I think probably about 2 hours at least each.
Yeah. Now, it wasn't nonstop. Yeah. We would pause because we were in a group, but it also wasn't like getting out every 5 minutes and hanging out. Like we were driving.
That's right.
With some obstacles that required some significant accelerator input.
For sure.
Not just a Forest Service road. There were some technical sections.
I thought so.
Yep.
And then to come back, another hour drive back to the hotel, and we got there and we were at like half a tank. Half a battery. Yeah, it was pretty impressive. That surprised me.
I think a lot of people who are concerned about range with EVs, I don't want to say it's unfounded, but there's an anxiety that we have of not being able to fill up kind of at will an EV. But I think that in practice, when you get behind the wheel and you really take one out, that purely an EV, not a hybrid, but an EV that has a significant range like this, you find that it's fine. Yeah,
and didn't they say that like with the equivalent of a supercharger, you can go from 20 to 80% in 40 minutes? Was that the spec that we heard?
That's what I remember hearing. Yeah,
that's impressive. I mean, like that, just go have a nice coffee or enjoy lunch and you're ready to go.
I may be mistaken, but I remember them saying you could get 100 miles in 10 minutes of charging.
That's fast.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yep.
And that's all the things we're learning. I mean, we're just at the beginning of all of this.
I know. That's the exciting
and they're learning stuff so quickly. There's so much pressure on innovation in this segment because they know the problems, they know the resistance that consumers have to electric vehicles, and they're actively trying to take away those reasons to say no.
Yeah.
The suspension it's four-wheel independent airbag suspension. So it has currently 3 modes on height. There's an entry access mode height. When you go to watts to freedom for the 0 to 60 launch, it lowers the vehicle down quite a bit as well, automatically. And then it has like a normal mode that you can drive around. And then it has this off-road mode. With a future update, they said that there's going to be an extract mode, which essentially lifts the Hummer 6 inches.
Man.
And we saw one parked out in the parking lot in extract mode, and it is way up there. I mean, the A-arms are at quite the angle, but if you were high centered on a ledge, or you were stuck in a little bit of mud, or you came down on a log or something like that, it'd be really easy to get out with that. I thought that was really clever. Yeah, it's got this infinity roof that I thought was really interesting. What did you think of that?
So when we were on the trail and it hailed on us, because of course we got some really interesting weather out there, which is actually what we want when we're testing a vehicle like this. We want to kind of have some extremes to see how it performs. But I remember I was distinctly aware of how much glass there was in the roof and how much visibility I had because the hail was hitting it, and it was like amplified.
It was totally.
Yeah, but having that view is really it's really pleasant. I don't know. I mean,
I think it makes it kind of like a convertible. I mean, you can take out all 4 of those panels. They all store
in the frunk.
In the frunk, yeah. And then the rear window rolls down,
Yeah, it's kind of Forerunner style. The whole thing goes.
Exactly. So you really do feel like you're in an open air vehicle, I thought.
Yeah.
That was pretty clever.
Yeah, it's really nice, especially, I mean, like many of us go on the trails to enjoy and be in the nature. And so that really kind of gives you that opportunity.
Well, and speaking of that, that was one of my most profound takeaways was the silence of the electric vehicle on the trail. I thought that was one of the most pleasant off-roading experiences I had had in that regard. In fact, one of the spotters was bringing somebody down an obstacle, and then here comes this like little ground squirrel, completely could care less that this vehicle was coming towards it because it doesn't sound like, like a UTV screaming like a 12-year-old. I mean, it's like, did I just say that? It's like, it's very quiet. So it's just super chill going through the trail. And then when we were coming back, we were all in a line. I mean, there was 10 vehicles or more maybe.
Yeah.
And we're all just cruising along, total silence. And here comes this little javelina, and he's totally carefree. He's not.
Yeah, he wasn't running. He wasn't taking off because of us.
No stress.
He was just kind of like going about his normal business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of the engineers, one of the engineers we rode with in the morning, Aaron, he was talking about how he just like would surprise deer on a regular basis with this vehicle because it was so silent.
Yeah. I mean, in my few other experiences in vehicles that are, well, in this case, a hybrid, the 4xe, but driving under electric power, I had the same experience, and with the Hummer too. I mean,
yeah,
it's so pleasant that just the silence, not listening to like motors just idling, and
Yeah, and it's not I mean, I love internal combustion for all of the right reasons, but this is actually, I think, an argument for it. It is, you're very much connected to the experience. You're just. And we had this breeze coming through the window. It was just perfect. It was really, I thought, pleasant to drive with no noise. And, everybody else appreciates that too. I mean, the campers that you're driving by and the animals and the hikers, and like we're a multi-use community, and we all need to do our part to make it as pleasant as possible for everybody. And I think this is a big step in the right direction. So
I would agree.
It comes with 35-inch tall tires, but they designed it to fit 37s, which I thought was really clever. So with no modifications, 37s bolt up. So the wheel well clearance is suitable for 37s.
Yep.
It'll clearly affect range and some other things, and I don't even know that it needs it. This thing is really capable, but somebody will want to put 37s on their Hummer, I'm sure.
I mean, yeah, I do already.
And then, we talked about the full-length boron skid plates.
Mm-hmm.
What'd you think of the four-wheel steering?
So cool.
Yeah.
It's so cool. And it's new, but it's not.
Yeah.
And I think GMC even they've produced other vehicles that have this feature.
Yep.
If I'm not mistaken. I don't remember which vehicle it was.
Yeah, like early 2010, they had a Denali that had I think they call it quadra-steer or something like that, but it did have steering in the rear.
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked. I mean, as someone who drives a large vehicle as my daily driver, I've gotten used to that. I remember that feeling of initially getting behind the wheel and being slightly uncomfortable with the clearances and trying to get familiar with turning radius and stuff like that, and hitting a few curbs in the process. And in the Hummer EV, it is, I mean, it's like a game changer.
It is.
When you're behind the wheel. It is executed so well, though. It doesn't feel like something alien. It just kind of feels right. And I mean,
it feels impossible. Like, how did I just make that make that turn?
Yeah, I mean, we were navigating some really narrow parts of trail with cactus right up to the sides of the tracks, and I mean, it just kind of danced in between them, and it's fun following another Hummer EV and seeing that in action, because the back kind of like swings out just a little bit. And
it's crazy.
And I thought it was really cool too. Across the different driving modes, they changed the turning rate of the rear wheels. So, like for instance, in terrain mode, you get the most extreme. I forget what the ratio was.
Wasn't it 1.2 to 1? So the rear is actually turning faster than the front.
Right. And so it kind of helps you pivot around obstacles much easier. And then, when you're in off-road or just kind of standard driving mode, it's much
I think it was 0.6 or something. So the rear is kind of catching up to the front.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. I thought it was And it makes sense because off-road, especially in terrain mode, you're going very slow. So it gives the rear steering time to catch up. Whereas if you were on the street and you were going through like some like dynamic driving situations, you wouldn't want the rear to be trying to catch up to the driver inputs, which are very direct. So it does make sense that the rear would be slower to engage with that. And then you can turn it off, or you can go into crab walk mode, which was very cool. You have to do this long press, which it seemed like an unnecessarily long press, like half of that time or a third of that time. I think makes a lot of sense. I understand why they need you to confirm it, because the vehicle all of a sudden starts to move in a direction that you better hope that you expected it to do that.
I saw, like, you turn the wheel 180 degrees, but you're just kind of shifting. You're not actually. It was,
you're not actually turning.
Right.
And so I found a practical application for it. We were trying to do some video work, and we were in this line of Hummers, and they were all very tight, like front to back, I mean, like a parallel parking situation. So I turned on crab walk mode, and I basically just like came out of the line of trucks to the side. It just scooted sideways out, and off I went. It was pretty cool.
It was very clever, and I think it's kind of it points to one of the funny things about just all of the technology and new features in this vehicle. You have to like rethink about what driving a car is like, because some of these new features are so alien to the average driver. It's like you have to figure out what the scenarios are where these features become useful. But they are useful. That's the thing. They're not just gimmicks. I mean, there is a real time and place for that crab mode, just as there is
for sure
the four-wheel steering.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think crab mode would be great in compact city environments where you're dealing with really tight tolerances. And then on our way back out, in one of the lead vehicles, they got high-centered coming around a corner, so they just turned on crab mode and then pointed the tires to the right, and they basically just moved the vehicle off of the obstacle by shifting it sideways, as opposed to putting it further and deeper into the skid plates. So that was just like, it was very clever, and it would be easy to dismiss it as a gimmick, but it's not a gimmick. It's pretty impressive. Yeah. I don't think you'll use it very often, and if it didn't have it, it wouldn't be the end of the world. But the rear wheel steering for tightening the turning radius, it's amazing. It's actually very similar turning radius to a two-door Jeep Wrangler, which is nuts.
Yeah.
For something that big.
Yep.
This content is brought to you by Overland Journal, our premium quality print publication. The magazine was founded in 2006 with the goal of providing independent equipment and vehicle reviews, along with the most stunning adventures and photography. We care deeply about the countries and cultures we visit and share our experiences freely with our readers. We also have zero advertorial policy and do not accept any advertiser compensation for our reviews. By subscribing to Overland Journal, you're helping to support our employee-owned and veteran-owned publication. Your support also provides resources and funding for content like you are watching or listening to right now. You can subscribe directly on our website at overlandjournal.com. All right, we did ask the question about payload because that's important to us. And on these Edition 1 vehicles, which are heavily loaded with accessories and
they have
luxuries,
all the accessories, right?
I think so. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Maybe not the dealer installed ones, but I think it has all the features that you would get on a build.
Yep.
It still had a 1,300 pound payload. Now, what's interesting about that is that you can tow with this vehicle. So if you're towing a trailer, you have to figure in the fact that you may have a 500 pound tongue weight, which goes against your payload. So now you're at 800 pounds. If you've got 4 full-size guys, you're banging up against that payload really, really quick. Yep. So it's important to note that 1,300 pounds of payload is acceptable for sure. But what they said was that other models that are less contented will have more payload. But it is, I think, important to frame it within the context of you don't really need to modify this car. It's not like you've got to I've got to put sliders on it, and I got to put skid plates, and I got to put, heavy duty, axles, and I got to put in big tire. It's got all of that already. So there's not going to be many accessories you're going to put on it, in my mind, that would take up payload.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. When you, hopefully some of you get the opportunity to drive one of these at some point, even if it's just for fun for a day, I think you'll find that, yeah, you're not left wanting for anything.
Not really.
Features wise that it doesn't have.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Super Cruise a little bit.
Yeah, Super Cruise is super cool.
Yeah, because we're going to talk about the road driving impressions that you had.
Well, it's a good place to start. So Super Cruise is the Hummer's version of autopilot. You basically push a button and it takes over. So it does the steering for you. It will lane change. It maintains speed. It will overtake other cars.
When it first did the lane change, how was that?
It caught me off guard, because
both of us.
Yeah. I didn't know what was going on. I came to grab the wheel. I didn't take over, but
sure.
I brought my hands back immediately. And the reason being because the only other experience I have in an autonomous car would be like a Tesla. And this may have changed now because it's been quite a few years since I drove that vehicle. But in the autopilot mode that had, I would have to manually put the turn signal on to have it change lanes for me.
Sure.
So the adaptive cruise control would obviously take into effect immediately when it was under autopilot, and it would catch up to a car but maintain a safe following distance and slow down if it needed to, but it wouldn't change lanes. And
that was a trip.
Yeah, it was good. It was entertaining. And
yeah, so for those that are listening, this thing will actually check the lane next to you, check the blind spot, look for an opening. It will put on the blinker. Mm-hmm. It will move over a lane. It will pass the car, and then it will go back into the lane that it needs to if it needs to do that. It's like unbelievable.
It's so wild. And it's so nice though. I mean, like, again, this is a kind of thing that some people look at as like novelty, but when you use it, you immediately see the value of it. I mean, talk about a relaxing driving experience. Like, you just kind of sit back and you can't disengage completely, obviously. Like, we had times where the Super Cruise shut off and I had to take over. And partially that is because it's such a new vehicle, and their data that allows for Super Cruise to operate is somewhat limited right now. I think they said they have about 200,000 miles of roads mapped where you can use Super Cruise, which certainly sounds like a lot, but in the context of the whole of the U.S., that means there's still a lot of roads that are not.
Yeah, we had several roads that, like highways, that didn't have it when we were doing the drive, but the 101 did, and that was just like to watch it effortlessly. I mean, better than the average driver by quite some margin, because it stayed right in the lane. It wasn't wavering. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think I told you, I'm like, don't you feel like you need to pick up your phone and start texting?
Oh, yeah.
But it's just what's happening right now is that people are just picking up their phone and texting, but they don't have, the vehicle's not paying attention for them.
Yep.
So, like, I'm not suggesting for a moment that people should be reading or texting while they're in Super Cruise, but people are going to do that. So the world is still better off that this technology exists. It's a lot less likely that the vehicle is going to run into something or go off the road and into a ditch.
Exactly, yeah. I think, those momentary times where we're not paying attention, like having something operating and trying to maintain a trajectory and speed and avoiding obstacles is great. Now, it did struggle a little bit with some scenarios. Like, there was that one kind of interchange that we went through,
right,
where it told me, it said Super Cruise, disengaging or turning off, deactivating, and I had to take over. So that's not entirely surprising. That's kind of a complex scenario, and I'm fine with that.
Sure.
If I need to be the driver again, that's fine. And I think they do a great job of visually making it clear that it's going to stop. There's an actual kind of like illuminated panel that's embedded in the steering wheel that lights up. So it's green when Super Cruise is on, and it turns red, and it's red in your face. So it was obvious to me that I needed to take over.
Yeah, it was just so neat to watch. Mm-hmm. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then what else did you think on the road? I mean, how did the overall road driving experience go for you?
I mean, it's super comfortable.
Yeah.
For such a big vehicle, it was quiet inside the cabin, I thought.
Yeah, we heard some tire noise, which would be expected because these are aggressive tires.
Yep.
but it's so quiet otherwise that you actually do notice other noises. Like on the trail, I even noticed like the air-conditioned seats. Like you would notice the blower, whereas if you were driving an internal combustion vehicle, the engine noise would drone out the blower for the air-conditioned seats, but you actually could hear it. It was so quiet.
Yep. And it's kind of funny. They will pipe in noise, driving noise. That's kind of, it's like manufactured, right?
It is right through the speakers.
From the speakers. So you have that sense of kind of the sense of the noise of the internal combustion engine, even though it's not there. So
yeah, and in some ways I like that. I believe that there's a way to turn it down a little bit. I think you have to have it because, as we noticed in some obstacles, you get very deep into the throttle, and I can see why the engineers would want to make the driver aware of the fact that they're getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the throttle, because there's no other indication. Like the RPMs aren't going up. You don't see that like you would in an internal combustion engine.
Right.
So but it was a little loud and maybe seemed like more than you needed it to be. And I'd even like to see it go away completely at lower speeds and lower throttle positions.
Sure.
Or a lesser throttle position. So, but it does make sense once you get into the throttle deeper that it's got to start telling you that, okay, you're getting close to that 1,200 foot-pounds of torque that you're asking of this engine. Like, is that really what you want to be doing right now?
Sure. That's a good point. Other kind of driving, road-related things, I really like that regenerative braking paddle on the steering wheel. So it was on the left-hand side, kind of up at the 10 o'clock area of the wheel. And you could, it's a manual lever that you pull towards you, and it activates like above average regenerative braking. So in situations where you don't need an abrupt stop and you can slow down gradually, it kind of allows you to gamify this experience of extending the range to its maximum. So you can capture extra energy by braking with that instead of the brake pedal.
Well, and it was shocking to me how much power there is in the regenerative process, because like off-road, using that same paddle, you can basically bring the vehicle to a stop without using the mechanical brakes. It just provides that much resistance. So when you're going downhill off-road, if you can, I wish that paddle was kind of like a rheostat where you were feeding in a percentage.
Right, because it is either, it's just on or off.
It felt that way to me. That may not be the case.
Yeah.
And we didn't ask the engineers that question, but it felt like it was pretty much an on or off situation.
Yep.
It would be nice to see it like ramp up and you could actually use it just for regenerative only is what I want in this situation. So you can add on to the range.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. What do you think about comfort, like the overall like interior, the way the interior looked, the technology, the electronics package on the inside?
Yeah, I mean, I think starting with comfort, comfort was above average, I would say, for myself. I really like the finishes on the inside and kind of just the visual appeal of it. It feels very at once modern, but also kind of retro a little bit.
It had a mid-century modern kind of vibe to it, those bronze
and they're like
vents,
rectangular, kind of big rectangles.
Exactly.
Yeah, the materials choice I thought was very interesting and appealing to me, which is funny because I chose cloth seats for our truck just because they feel simple and easy to take care of and they're not fancy. And the Hummer's funny, it kind of feels fancy, but it kind of feels sporty. It's like a lot of different like synthetic kind of surfaces that are textured, and there's nice contrasts, and it's kind of a non-absorbent surface everywhere, which was actually kind of nice. There was one point I remember when it had been dumping rain and there was a lot of water on the roof, and I opened the window, like a bucket of water just about came in, and it kind of splashed all over the armrest and everything, but it kind of just like made its way down to the floor. It didn't really absorb in and stay wet all day, and it was dry pretty quickly.
Yeah, that was something that I noticed in the rain is they may need to look at some kind of a rain channel or way of moving that water off of that one corner of the window, because when it's raining and you roll down the window at all, it's like basically like the bucket mode. You go into bucket mode because like the water just starts pouring onto the door card.
It happened on both sides.
It
didn't
did,
it? Yeah.
on the passenger side and on the driver's side. So I thought that was really interesting. There's something about how those panels are made that it's just channeling 100% of the rain that's falling on the vehicle into that one spot. It's like it got really wet. Like it really did. I'm sure that they take into consideration moisture because it has removable tops and all that. Like there's got to be some consideration of it getting wet, but it seemed a little excessive on the water pouring in.
But yeah, I mean, that's kind of comfort. I found it comfortable. Seats adjusted well, air conditioned seats, heated steering wheel.
Yep.
I thought kind of the layout of the cockpit was nice. You get two massive screens. You've got your screen with all of your driving information right in front of you that's digital, and then you also have the massive infotainment screen, which is touchscreen, and it's also got a couple rows of piano keys below it, and those are kind of neat. They kind of they change based on the particular menu or screen that you're looking at on the infotainment system. So it's kind of neat because none of the keys are labeled, but as you go through the different screens, you can kind of see what the individual buttons are assigned to.
And I did like that they weren't ashamed to put the performance attributes of the car very front and center with those piano keys. So, rear locker, front and rear locker, vehicle stability control off, parking guidance off. So they were very prominent, and I like the fact that there wasn't too many buttons. I think maybe EVs, there's this desire to make everything super techy where you can activate anything with a button or some multiple menu pushing. But it felt like everything that I needed the car to do was right there at hand, which I liked.
And all the ones you just mentioned, those ones are static. They don't change with the menu,
right.
So lockers and things like that.
I did notice that in order, because it's coming to mind right now, to activate the front locker, you have to be in terrain mode, which I did not care for because the terrain mode activates the one pedal drive. I would like to be able to, in some other mode, or maybe it's possible, and I did forget to ask the engineers this, but maybe there's some way to do a custom menu so that you can be in like a maximum off-road performance mode, not high speed, low speed technical terrain, and then you can turn the front locker on and off without having to have the one pedal operation, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But the fact that it has a front locker is a great thing, but it requires 5-6 second hold to turn the front locker on. And I think that's too long. I think and there needs to be maybe give it a confirmation on the screen, push it, and then are you sure you want to lock the front diff? And then click yes, because there's no other indication that you've held it long enough,
right,
other than that it turns on. So I think that can be improved probably with a software update.
That's the nice thing about that. Yeah, that should be something that could be changed.
Yeah, I think you need to be able to toggle through the front and rear locker without having to hold it for 5 to 6 seconds every time.
Yep.
There's on a technical trail, you can be turning the front locker on and off regularly, and you got to come to a complete stop, do the whole thing. It'd be nice to see it be a little more reactive.
Yeah, I agree.
Or maybe you just agree to it the first time you do it, and then it lets it turn on and off actively until the next time you key cycle the car. How did the high-speed stability feel on the road? Like, did it feel confidence-inspiring to you at driving at speed?
It did, yeah, I thought so. We had a couple times where I did bury the accelerator and just kind of
on-ramps.
Yeah, on-ramps, right? As long as you're, there's no rule about how fast you can come up to speed. As long as you don't exceed the speed limit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember one in particular that was it was a curving on-ramp, and I kind of went for it, and you said, trust it, and I did. And I mean, it held the line that I picked pretty well, I thought.
I noticed that as well. One of the things that we look for, we call it traceability, but when you're in a steady state curve, like on that on-ramp or in a large sweeper or any turning event, when you hold the line, does the vehicle start to understeer off of that line? Does it require a lot of correction from the driver? Is it very traceable? Does it continue to maintain that arc without a lot of other inputs if external factors haven't changed? So the vehicle is very traceable. It has a lot of has low driver effort. It actually increases the feel of the steering weighting because it is an electronic steering system, but it makes it feel firmer at road speeds, which I also like because it is a big truck and it should feel like a big truck. But then when you get off-road, they lighten that up, and then the steering effort goes very, very low, which I think is also really nice. It reduces fatigue while you're moving through the rocks and everything.
That's a good point. And I do distinctly remember those two qualities of like the almost effortlessly turning the wheel in the off-road scenarios and versus, more feedback, more tactile feel to the wheel.
Yeah, I thought the on-road presence was great. And like if you go from, let's call it 40 to 75, it happens so quickly that the speedometer can't actually keep up with the speed increasing. Like it was like skipping like 5-6 numbers at a time.
Yeah, just jumping.
It was unbelievable how fast it was. As you can tell in the audio, like we had a good time with the speed of this thing. Let's get into the off-road a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I mean, it was such a pleasure. Like I kind of mentioned it before, but it almost felt like the course was like a dance.
Yep.
And despite the fact that you're in this very large vehicle, it's kind of pivoting and just kind of gliding between these features. I mean, the suspension was very settled. There is a sway bar in the front, correct? But not in the rear. So sometimes there's a little bit more abrupt motion when you approached an obstacle, but usually the rear end of the vehicle felt a little bit more settled through some of those things.
Yep.
One of the things that really blew me away was I would attribute it to the traction control, but its ability to still accelerate very fast on loose surfaces.
Sure.
And you really kind of demonstrated that to me through some of those washes that the course followed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd be able to. We were down in a gravel wash, and you'd come out of a corner, and we were just kind of cruising through one corner, and then there's this straightaway ahead of us, and heavily corrugated in the beginning because there's lots of wheel hop and even axle wrap from other vehicles. You don't really get much axle wrap from the Hummer, nothing perceptible, but you do get wheel hop, and so there's these deep corrugations in the start of the straightaway. And the fact that it could hook up as well as it did, I mean, it would just launch down that wash. It was pretty amazing. And then we did some panic stop testing as well, or extreme threshold braking maneuvers as well. And in those deep corrugations, like it maintained a lot of traction, but you could tell that there was a lot of wheel movement, and we were banging off of the stops as well. Like you could actually hear a couple of these hard kind of hits going through these corrugations, because again, the front end is dive down, so you have very little up travel because you're under all this braking pressure, and now you've got these big holes from the corrugation, so you could really feel the suspension banging up against the bump stops, which was pretty interesting, but very, very neutral at speed off-road, which is what we typically want. A lot of manufacturers bake in a ton of understeer for safety. They'd rather you end up in the ditch as opposed to oversteering and then rolling. So they bake in a bunch of understeer, but that is not the case at all with the Hummer. And you can turn off vehicle stability control for the most part. There's ways to even disable it more, which I don't know is a good idea to share to the masses, but I'm sure it'll come out on the internet at some point in time. But you can really let the vehicle operate very analog. And the way that they've got this battery pack so low and so centered on the vehicle, it is actually quite quick to respond to steering input, and even more so to steering under heavy braking input. So that's what I'm looking for. Is this vehicle understeering on me? It's taking me offline, or am I getting a lot of braking effectiveness, and then is it turning in at a high rate? Is it turning in appropriately based upon the steering input? And it would turn in really nicely. And they also don't cut the throttle either. So I could be heavy left foot braking in a corner. the front end dives down, the front end hooks up, it turns in, and I can actually start feeding throttle, which starts to rotate the rear end out. And it's just, it's super fun. So it is truly a super truck off-road. It has 13 inches of wheel travel, front and rear. So that's long travel, which does a great job of absorbing impacts and wallows and other irregularities in the surface. But it's also a heavy vehicle too. So it's important off-road to know that you don't have anywhere near the grip that you do on asphalt. So braking distances are going to be longer than you may expect. It's 10,000 pounds, mass in motion. You know, there's only so much traction available to those tires to slow the vehicle down. So making sure that you pay a little bit of attention to the fact that you got a freight train in motion. So, so high speed off-road is kind of what you would expect it to be. Super truck territory, very fast, very confidence inspiring, stable, safe. And then you can go into a couple different modes that even make it a little safer as well. But then we got into some slow speed technical stuff too.
Yeah, there were some kind of steep, quick up off camber things with like large rocks, some ledges and things like that.
Crossed axle holes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, traction was great through those areas. I don't think we made it through all of the obstacles on the first round through when I was driving without engaging the lockers.
That's right.
And
it was raining.
And that's not to say that the team didn't select a course that was truly challenging. I mean, this was made to appeal to maybe a broader range of drivers.
Correct.
Some folks with a little bit less off highway driving experience, which is fine and reasonable. But these were not gimmies either. You kind of had to pick a line.
You did. And
it was really fantastic how well it did without even needing those lockers. But then we did test the lockers obviously too, because there were, I mean, I say we didn't need them. I saw some of the other trucks get some wheel spin and, have some challenges. And I like to think that maybe we didn't experience that because of some of our trainings that we've done and maybe helped us.
Yeah, well, I think we did a good job of maintaining the right momentum through there. One of the main reasons that I choose to select at least a rear locker in most cases is I don't want to damage the trail. Like it's like we need to be good stewards of these places. And this was a beautiful trail. It had no trash that I could see.
I saw one balloon.
Got it.
But that's not from the people driving.
The typical Arizona,
Yep.
You'll see, Mylar balloons everywhere. Mm-hmm. But it was a beautiful trail. It was fairly remote, just rich density of saguaro and ocotillo, and like you don't want to tear the trail up because that's when they close them. So for me, I didn't want to have wheel spin, so I engaged that virtual rear locker in almost every climbing scenario, and it just completely exceeded my expectations. I think it also helps the vehicle a little bit because one of the places that an electric vehicle struggles the most is just right off that 0 RPM. So a good example of that would be like in Moab, you do the Moab bump over a ledge, and you'll push the vehicle up against the ledge and you'll try to press the front tires into the surface so that they get a lot of grip and they can climb up and over. And then there's another maneuver that you do with the rear axle where you kind of bounce the chassis up and then you feed some throttle so the front end pulls the rear up against the shelf and then you can climb up and over it. But these electric motors don't do well at that 0-ish RPM range, like that very low RPM. They can't start to develop all that torque. So I noticed that by kind of keeping it moving very slowly, you didn't get in as much trouble. Anytime we saw another driver struggle, it's because they got onto the throttle, it spun, they got freaked out, and then they stopped
completely.
And they're on a steep climb, and they're trying to get going again. So you can see the truck is struggling to get going and spinning a little bit, and the brake traction control is trying to arrest it. And I think that's a very difficult problem for electric vehicles to solve. So as drivers, we have to learn to adjust a little bit for these electric vehicles and very slowly, again, like slow RPM, low RPM, continue with a little bit of movement through these obstacles so that it doesn't have to restart from 0 again.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, overall, slow speed off-road technical scenarios, it just was great.
It was really impressive. Minimal head toss, so it was really comfortable for the driver and the passengers. The camera views took care of any of the visibility problems that you just get from the way that it's designed and the size of it. I thought that was really impressive. The tires were great. They were designed specifically for this vehicle to be a combination of off-road performance and on-road range, maintaining as much range as possible. So that was impressive.
Yeah.
18-inch wheel, which, I mean, they're really big tires on there. You can see how big they are. And then all of the electronic packages worked great. The one pedal drive is really interesting. It's kind of like left foot braking, but with just one foot. So you start to accelerate and the vehicle moves forward. You start to let off the accelerator. It actually starts to slow down. And not just because of like what we would experience with an engine where it's compression braking, it's actually starting to apply the brakes without you touching the brake pedal. So it'll actually, if you lift off quickly, it kind of parks you, like it jerks you to a stop.
It does, and that was in the low range.
Correct, in the L position.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the other drivers mentioned that they got on the radio and kind of asked because they noticed when we were driving in terrain mode in low, the brake lights were on all the vehicles consistently, and they said, "What does that mean? Do those ever go off?" And the engineers kind of got back to us and said, it's because there is a little bit of brake being applied the entire time.
Yep.
And
we did smell a little bit of brake
smell
at one point from one of the vehicles in front of us. In fact, the driver got up and did a walk around because he had been in terrain mode for clearly a very, very long time. So I think you want to move in and out of it. You want to be in terrain mode in really technical obstacles. But that's where I would like to see the front locker being available without one pedal drive. So if you're doing a long trail, the brakes are going to get hot. You're using more energy from the battery than you need to because you're having to overcome the braking. I would like to see the ability to engage the front locker without one pedal drive and without the vehicle brakes being applied.
Sure.
I think that would be an advantage. Front and rear departure angles, front approach and rear departure angles are great. You can improve the breakover angle with an air suspension. You can go into a high mode. There's rock sliders that come on this edition of the vehicle that really protect it. And then, of course, that full-length boron skid plating underneath. So quite the beast on the trail. And because of that four-wheel steering, it's way more nimble than you'd think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was incredible. Again, kind of dancing through these narrow sections of trail, like it drove like a much smaller vehicle than it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, I think, overall impressive off-road.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Well, what was your kind of thoughts around overlanding one of these things?
I mean, let's just quickly redefine overlanding. It's vehicle-based travel. Mm-hmm. So it's actually a pretty broad thing that we're defining with this one term. So I think, yes, absolutely it could. Charging infrastructure is going to be one of the major considerations. But as we found out, we got a whole day of driving with hours of off-road, off-highway driving, and we still had plenty of battery life left to get back to where we started.
And most trails are fairly short. I think you could easily do the Alpine Loop.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, where I think you run into trouble is like you want to go camping for quite some time, and you've got fridges running and all kinds of other accessories that are drawing on that battery pack. I think that starts to be more of a consideration, but.
Yeah.
At least in the 48 states, there's just not many scenarios where you're going to run out of range.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of times when we use the term overlander, people tend to think of full-timers, people who are traveling for months at a time. So maybe kind of what you just alluded to with, needing a bunch of accessories or auxiliary things, like those could bring up some challenges for this particular platform, maybe not ideal, but also realistically, based on the price, probably not a vehicle everyone's going to choose for it, but that doesn't mean it couldn't do it. You talked about it has 1,300-pound payload, so maybe for a couple plus camping gear, that's
no problem.
Totally sufficient. It has enough of a bed that maybe we'll see some cool, innovative company come up with a lightweight camper.
I'd love to see like a go fast style. Yeah, exactly. I think that would be, it is a go fast camper. This is a go fast truck.
Yeah, definitely.
It kind of needs one on the back. I think that would be really clever.
Might be the perfect test of the huckability of that camper.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, so you've got that bed, you've got the utility of the bed, and also there are some accessories that will be available right away that would be useful. So we saw one of the vehicles at the initial facility, it had crossbars, and it also had some tower. Was it like towers on the bed, on the sides of the bed, and there was a rooftop tent.
It was Free Spirit Recreation rooftop tent up top. You can get 2 spare tires in the bed, a bunch of light packages, of course, but it would be very easy to camp out of that thing. And I think it's much more of a North American overlander than we would think, and that's because it has a 350-mile range. Like we were able to experience an entire day of driving on road and off, and we came back with a half full battery. So it definitely, I think, I suspect it will solve most of the problems that a North American overlander would have.
And I think
driving
even
in the backcountry.
Yeah, even for longer pavement-bound road trips, I really think it'll do just fine here. When you consider the fact that it can go from 20% charge to 80% charge in 40 minutes. I mean, you're driving an internal combustion vehicle, you're going to have to stop to use the restroom. You're going to have to stop to refuel, maybe pick up a meal. It's like it's not going to be that different in this vehicle.
Yeah, that's very true.
So, yeah.
I think there'll be a bunch of accessories that'll come out. I think integrating a winch with this will be really interesting. It'll be fun to see how people start to solve problems, because it is 10,000 pounds. So it's not going to do great in snow or sand or mud, because it's not the Hummer's fault. It weighs 10,000 pounds. So you can only have so much flotation even out of a 35-inch tall tire. Mm-hmm. So I think having a winch would probably be a good idea. So yeah, very cool. Well, any final thoughts on the Hummer Supertruck?
Can I have one?
We just need one at the office for,
yes.
Like, I'm feeling a little stressed.
Yeah.
We go 0 to not stressed in 3 seconds.
Yeah, nothing else comes to mind, man. We've covered quite a lot today.
We did.
Yeah. It's cool. It's just so cool to see these vehicles coming about with so much innovation put into them. You know, I really, now I want to go and watch the A&E documentary that was produced on this even more, for a couple of reasons. One, we met a bunch of the people who are in the documentary, featured prominently, and I would love to see what the behind the scenes was like. And you know, for those people that are unfamiliar, the timeline for production of this is like ridiculous.
2 years.
Right, which is what, like half of what a normal vehicle?
Yes,
and they were designing it from the ground up. It's not like
during the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean,
so really interesting how they accomplished that.
Yeah, so I think there's probably a really interesting story there. And so, yeah, I would love to go and watch that and just kind of soak more in about this.
Yeah, and we're seeing a vehicle like this from a major OEM. You know, we're not just seeing it from some disruptor tech startup. We're seeing an OEM deliver an electric Supertruck in 2 years with an enormous amount of capability and the manufacturing capability to actually deliver units. And they're already delivering Hummers today. So now they are booked out, I think, wouldn't they say, till 2024 or something like that? You can't even get one, get on the list or something like that. So it's impressive how many they've already sold. But it's going to be very exciting to see the big OEMs addressing EVs and making more and more interesting vehicles.
I was going to say, I think, you know, my takeaway is like, while this is a vehicle I personally probably wouldn't own for a variety of reasons, not because it's not fun, nothing like that, but, you know, the development of vehicles like this, there's a lot that comes out of this that will trickle down into things that are maybe more accessible to a wider variety of people. And that's really exciting. I mean, that's
they've announced an electric Sierra. So we're going to see a half-ton standard pickup with electric capability soon.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well, thanks, Matt. It was really fun to go out there and do that. We're going to have a full video on this on YouTube. It probably will have already launched by the time that you hear this, or on the same day. So we've got a video coming out that Matt and I produced from the experience. You can see all of that stuff we were talking about live as it's happening, including Matt and Mai's expression on the 0 to 60. Unless Paula wants to drop a little Easter egg into the YouTube video for the podcast, but it'll be pretty fun to see the video come together. We'll have a full article on Expedition Portal as well, and then also an article in Overland Journal.
Cool.
Well, thank you, Matt. We appreciate you all listening, and we will talk to you next time.